Welcome back to another edition of Force Friday, where we talk about Star Wars theories, characters, concepts, comparisons, analyzations, collectibles, and more. And today we're going to be doing a character breakdown of one of the most mysterious and confusing characters in the entire Star Wars saga, at least in my opinion. As a matter of fact, we've been watching the movies at home recently, getting ready for the Rise of Skywalker, and my wife looked over at me and said, I still don't understand this. And she's probably seen the movies more times than most, just by being around me for as long as she has. So let's get some of the easy stuff right out of the way. Prior to the Disney buyout, what's now referred to as Legends, it pretty much follows most of the canonical Disney treatment, only with far less details about his early life. And originally, when Lucas was working on Attack of the Clones, Sifo Dyas was going to be a pseudonym to protect the identity of Darth Sidious, who was actually creating the clone army while being manipulated by Darth Plagueis. However, when George Lucas realized he had a lot more ground to cover with Revenge of the Sith than perhaps he had intended, he cut that plot thread loose in order to tie up the more important stuff, and it wasn't until the Clone Wars where he was mentioned again. And most of his backstory was revealed in Season 6 of the Clone Wars. Now let's talk about him. He was the son of a fisherman from the Cassandran worlds. He was taken to the temple as a child to be trained as a Jedi, and put in the same clan as the young Count Dooku, who later ended up becoming the Padawan of Yoda. The Jedi were into some morally ambiguous acts, most of which involved snatching up young children. But more on that another day. Dooku and Dyas became best friends, just palling around in the temples with their big dumb helmets. But Dyas was always the curious type, and as a child, he even talked Dooku into helping him break into the Bogan collection, which consisted of forbidden treasures and items in the temple. But this was purely and mainly out of curiosity. It's more of a mischievous event than it is a malicious event. It's not as though the artifacts contain many dark side elements. However, I do believe some were present. This curiosity and possibly even mischievousness drew the attention of Jedi Master Lene Kostana. Now, I'll be honest with you, I'm only going to be using pictures of female Jedi because I don't know what she looked like. She was an Alteri species, which was near human. It evolved on the planet Alteria, originally a group of wandering nomads that eventually developed a society that placed a great importance on the development of oneself and spirituality. But since I can't find any images of her nor her people, we're just going to be using female Jedi-looking type characters. Hunted down ancient Sith relics and artifacts, so it's pretty much right up her alley. Now, much as we're familiar with, the Jedi don't always see eye to eye, and inside their kind of dogmatic practices, the Jedi Council, particularly Yoda, shunned these artifacts as dangerous temptations and believed finding them unnecessary due to the Sith being extinct. The Jedi have this strange, like hot and cold feeling regarding the Sith in most Star Wars canon. There's like this kind of obsession and curiosity regarding them, and also this fear and arguably even high motivation to sort of forget they ever existed. So while Yoda and the Council may have felt this way, Kostana believed these artifacts should be studied as to prepare for what she believed to be the Sith's inevitable return. And as we all know, it turns out she was right. And not only did Sifo end up getting her attention, he also ended up getting her training. Because after the Padawan trials, Dyas was selected by Kostana to be her Padawan. She took the majority of control over his training and certainly didn't shun herself away from any of his curiosity, even teaching him to open his mind to the cosmic force, which is the aspect that binds all life together. It was shortly thereafter that Dyas began seeing visions, particularly a world ravaged by fire, which turned out to be an accurate prediction of a solar storm. Ironically, this gift of foresight had kind of become rare amongst the Jedi of the time, so the fact that he had this ability was kind of a big deal, in the words of Ron Burgundy. It wasn't common, it wasn't standard, and it meant that this dude was special. Once again, Kostana and the Council don't quite see eye to eye, and while she's excited, possibly even motivated and inspired by this rare gift, the Council regarded such visions with fear and suspicion. From this point out, Kostana largely hid the extent of his abilities from the Council, who often sent Jedi with this ability to a correctional facility on the Citadel, which later becomes a separatist prison, which you can see in Season 3 of the Clone Wars. But Dyas continued upon the traditional path and became a Jedi Knight, and from here, he saw far less of his old pal Dooku, as the two were often far apart on separate missions. But he maintained
a good and close relationship with Kastana and continued to work with her as partners, largely because this ability that he had to kind of keep private by and large in order to protect himself from the fear and suspicion of the council at the time, he could confide in with Kastana. So that created a bond between the two that he probably didn't have with many others, if anyone. But with these visions going unchecked and this ability not being really harnessed by possibly the most powerful and able Jedi of the time to kind of hone it, they became more severe and powerful and even caused Dyas to develop a stutter. Also under the tutelage of Kastana, he began to inherit, for lack of a better term, many of her beliefs and possibly phobias, one of which being the inevitable return of the Sith. So the two continued to hunt down dark side artifacts, a trait that he showed curiosity in even as a child and Kastana never shied away from. Years later, the two of them helped Dooku defend his homeworld from invading pirates, once again against the wishes of the Council, as the planet was refused Republic help due to failing to pay taxes. It was after this mission that Dooku resigned from the order to help his homeworld, taking up the mantle of Count. When he did so formally to Master Yoda, Dyas was present. The reason why I mention this is to kind of follow the path of deceit, the path of treachery, the path of fear, anxiety, distrust, and curiosity between all three major players of this story. A child who expressed interest to an extent where he would even resort to mischievous acts to follow through. A master who believed in her pupil enough to hide his abilities from her superiors to not only protect him, but explore the possibilities of those abilities. And a friend who grew up alongside all of these acts, not necessarily partaking in any of the deceit or distrust, only to have the institution that he believed in fail to protect the world and people from which he came. It's just a recipe for a lot of things to go wrong. But even in the midst of all this, Dyas continues to stay on a fairly traditional path, becoming a Jedi Master and later on a member of the Jedi Council itself. It was around this time that his visions began shifting to a war that would engulf the galaxy and result in oppression and darkness. Now, these visions have kind of plagued him since he was a child, but continued to get more and more intense, feeding his own paranoia and becoming an advocate to the Council to create a grand army for the Republic. But if you've ever sat in a room full of people and one individual believes that the grass is blue and the sky is green, it doesn't take long for the rest of the people to deem him as being pretty crazy. Keep an eye on him and stay away from him if he can't be persuaded to change his point of view. And this was no different. Tensions arose between him and the fellow council members as he continued to advocate, leading eventually to him being expelled from the council. But even this punishment ended up honestly becoming a second-tier priority for him because he was so convinced of the reality of his visions that he secretly began visiting the cloners on Kamino. Imposting as still a member of the Jedi Council with full backing of the Council and the Republic behind him to create a clone army for the Republic. During the years of Valorum being Supreme Chancellor, Dyas was sent to deal with the Pike Syndicate. Yep, the same Pike Syndicate from Solo. The Chancellor's personal aide, Silman, was sent to accompany Dyas on this mission. Being held closer to the politicians of this time, it's no surprise that Darth Sidious ended up learning of Dyas' plan and seeing it as a potential threat to his own. So he positioned himself to take over the project and use it to his advantage. He sent his new apprentice Dooku, now a Dark Lord of the Sith, to arrange for Dyas' death. The Pikes were paid, and probably not well, I'd imagine, to shoot down Dyas' shuttle over their homeworld. In the process, Sifo Dyas was killed, his body recovered by the Pikes as proof, and Sidious was able to position himself in a better placement for the future army that he knew was coming. With Sidious now in full control of the clone project from behind the scenes, the inhibitor chips, which were originally intended to stop the clones from ever potentially betraying the Jedi or the Republic, were instead programmed with Order 66, which later was executed. It's a little sketchy as to what the Camino, the Caminian... It's a little sketchy as to what the cloners actually knew, but it appears from the Clone Wars that they were in full knowledge of Sidious's plan to include both the fall of the Jedi and the military force for control of the Republic. And that's pretty much his story. So who is he? In many ways, a purer Jedi than most at the time. A Jedi certainly with more foresight that, left unchecked, grew into a paranoia and ended up becoming the catalyst for the exact thing that scared him enough to try and fight. I love
that inescapable idea of destiny, of a character who saw the potential threat and did everything in his power to try and stop it, and ultimately, in the end, only ended up creating the exact threat he was afraid of. And in the midst of that process, meeting his doom. In the Clone Wars Season 6, the Jedi began investigating his death, but learned little thanks to the efforts of Count Dooku. I often wonder if all of those efforts on Dooku's part were to kind of serve the Emperor, or if in there he was also being protective of his childhood friend. But that's where my mind goes sometimes. Don't mind me. His only canon appearances are in Season 6 of the Clone Wars and the new audiobook, Dooku Jedi Lost. So I hope that helps shed some light on a pretty mysterious character of a plot thread that was initially created and meant to be explored, but abandoned in order to serve a larger story, but ultimately leave a lot of people scratching their heads. And my hope is that maybe you got one less itch now. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Until next time, take care.